In this lesson, we're going to look at the major scale. And the major scale is a collection of 7 notes that has a particular order. And the order has to do with the arrangement of half steps and whole steps. So you might ask, what are half steps and whole steps? Well, these are called intervals, and half steps and whole steps are the smallest types of intervals. And intervals are just the distance between any 2 keys on the piano or any 2 notes in music. For instance, from C to G, that's an interval, or from C here to C sharp, that's an interval. And you can also play intervals at the same time. So you could play C and G together. You could also play C, middle C, and C sharp together, and those would be intervals. Now, a half step is the smallest interval, and it's just the distance between one note and its neighboring note or key on the piano keyboard. So if we look at middle C and then we go 1 key directly up, that's the note C sharp, and that's a half step. And it sounds like that. It's a little bit like the Jaws theme, and together it's very dissonant or spicy sounding. Now when you have 2 half steps together, like this, C to C sharp and C sharp to D, that's called a whole step, and that would be like this, C to D. That whole step is composed of 2 half steps, this one and that one. It doesn't sound very beautiful, but it's kind of a logical idea. So now for this lesson, we're going to be looking first at the C major scale and then at the G major scale. And you will see and hear that there are many similarities between these 2 scales. So the next thing I'd like to talk about are degrees of the scale. And for the sake of ease of communication, the scales have been given a numbering for each note, starting on the 1st degree of the scale and then going upward. It's very simple. So in the key of C major, C is the 1st degree. Then D is the 2nd degree. E is the 3rd degree. F is the 4th. G is the 5th note of the scale, and it's called the 5th degree. A is the 6th note of the scale, and it's called, well, it's the 6th degree. And B is the 7th note of the scale, and it's called the 7th degree. It's also called the leading tone because it leads into C. So the pattern of half steps and whole steps for all major scale is this. There's a whole step between the 1st degree and the 2nd degree of the scale. There's another whole step between the 2nd degree and the 3rd degree of the scale. Then there's a half step between the 3rd degree and the 4th degree of the scale. Do you see how that works? There's no black key here. Then between the 4th degree of the scale and the 5th degree of the scale, there's a whole step. Between the 5th and the 6th degree of the scale, there's another whole step. Between the 6th degree of the scale and the 7th degree of the scale, there's a whole step. And finally, from the 7th degree of the scale to the octave, or the 8th, returning to the main note, the 1st degree or the 8th degree, depending on how you want to describe it, there's a half step. No black key. So to recap, in C major, we have just white keys, and we have the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. And we have this collection of half steps and whole steps. It goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Now let's look at the G major scale and talk a little bit about scale technique and playing the major scales. In the last lesson we talked about this thumb under technique, and that's very important with a lot of major and minor scales. You want, with the G major scale, to go G, A, B, and then thumb under to C. it will go look like this sideways. G, A, B, thumb under to C. And you want to propel yourself at least in one octave, almost like a ramp up to the F sharp. So it will sound like this. And then you'll go to the G. But you want to have a forward momentum when you're playing the scale, kind of from the bottom note to the top. And you should use a metronome, but this is just a kind of musical idea that there should be a little bit of a crescendo going up, and then as you descend, a little bit of a diminuendo. You also may want to turn your hand this way, going up, and then turn it that way, going down in the right hand. And then in the left hand, you would turn your left hand this way, ascending or going up, and then descending, turn it this way. I'm exaggerating the angle here just so you can see it on the video lesson, but it should be a little bit slighter in both hands. So here's an example of a 1 octave G major scale. And here it is a little higher. Now I'm going to play the C major scale, and I'd like you to listen for a kind of pattern for the notes. Think do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Now let's go to the G major scale and listen for that same pattern. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but on different notes, on different keys. Here we go. Let's go to an entirely different scale. It's still major, but it includes a lot of different notes that we haven't yet heard in this video. That's the C sharp major scale. And I still want you to listen for that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, but it's going to be played on different notes. Do you hear that pattern of whole steps and half steps? Well, that's the major scale. And it's the same pattern for C major, and it's the same pattern for G major. It's even the same pattern for C sharp major. We could also try it on D major. It would be the same pattern, just on different keys.